and welcome to our last installment of Number the Stars. Please, if you enjoyed this, leave a comment or something because I will consider doing another one. Though it is not as easy as I thought, so it probably will be smaller sections. It is hard to read aloud. Um, Chapter 15. My dogs smell meat. Anne Marie's mind raced. She remembered what her mother had said. If anyone stops you, you must pretend to be nothing more than a silly little girl. She stared at the soldiers. She remembered how she had stared at the others, frightened, when they had stopped her on the street. Kirsty hadn't been frightened. Kirsty had been, well, nothing more than a silly little girl, angered because the soldier had touched her hair that afternoon. She had known nothing of danger, and the soldier had been amused by her. Anne Marie willed herself, with all of her being, to behave as Kirsty would. "Good morning," she said carefully to the soldiers. They looked her up and down in silence. Both dogs were tense and alert. The two soldiers who held their leashes wore thick gloves. "What are you doing here?" one of them asked. Anne Marie held out her basket, with a thick loaf of bread visible. "My Uncle Henrik's forgot his lunch, and I'm taking it to him. He's a fisherman." The, the soldiers were looking around, their eyes... Don't do this to your books. The soldiers were looking around them. Their eyes glanced behind her and scanned the bushes on either side. "Are you alone?" one asked. Anne Marie nodded. "Yes," she said. One of the dogs growled, but she noticed that both dogs were looking at her lunch basket. One soldier stepped forward. The other and the two holding the dogs remained where they were. "You came out before daybreak just to bring a lunch? Why doesn't your uncle eat fish?" What would Kirsty reply? Anne Marie tried to giggle, the way her sister might. "Uncle Henrik doesn't even like fish," she said, laughing. "He says he sees too much of it and smells too much of it. Anyway, he wouldn't eat it raw." She made a face. "Well, I suppose he would if he were starving, but Uncle Henrik always has bread and cheese for lunch." "Keep chattering," she told herself, as Kirsty would. A silly little girl. "I like fish," she went on. "I like it the way my mother cooks it. Sometimes she rolls it in breadcrumbs and—" The soldier reached forward and grabbed the crisp loaf of bread from the basket. He examined it carefully. Then he broke it in half, pulling the two halves apart with his fists. This would enrage Kirsty, she knew. "Don't!" she said angrily. "That's Uncle Henrik's bread. My mother baked it." The soldier ignored her. He tossed the two halves of the loaf to the ground, one half in front of each dog. They consumed it, each snapping at the bread and gulping it so that it was gone in an instant. "Have you seen anyone in the woods?" The soldier barked the question at her. "No, only you." Anne Marie stared at him. "What are you doing in the woods, anyway? You're making me late. Uncle Henrik's boat will leave before I get there with his lunch, or what's left of his lunch." The soldier picked up the wedge of cheese. He turned it over in his hand. He turned to the three behind him and asked them something in their own language. One of them answered, "Nine," in a bored tone. Anne Marie recognized the word. The man had replied no. He had probably been asked, Anne Marie thought, "Do you want this, or perhaps should I give it to the dogs?" The soldier continued to hold the cheese. He tossed it back and forth between his hands. Anne Marie gave an exasperated sigh. "Can I go now, please?" she asked impatiently. The soldier reached for the apple. He noted its brown spots and made a face of disgust. "No meat?" he asked, glancing at the basket and napkin that lay at its bottom. Anne Marie gave him a withering look. "You know we have no meat," she said insolently. "Your army eats all of Denmark's meat." "Please, please," she implored in her mind, "don't lift the napkin." The soldier laughed. He dropped the bruised apple on the ground. One of the dogs leaned forward, pulling at his leash, sniffed the apple, and stepped back. But both dogs still looked intently at the basket, their ears alert, their mouths open. Saliva glistened on their pink, smooth gums. "My dog smells meat," the soldier said. "They smell squirrels in the woods," Anne Marie responded. "You should take them hunting." The soldier reached forward with the cheese in one hand, as if he were going to return it to the basket, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled out the flower cotton napkin. Anne Marie froze. Your uncle has a pretty little lunch, the soldier said scornfully, crumpling the napkin around the cheese in his hand. Like a woman, he added with contempt. Then his eyes locked on the basket. He handed the cheese and napkin to the soldier beside him. What's that, there in the bottom? He asked in a different, tenser voice. What would Kirsty do? Anne-Marie stamped her foot. Suddenly, to her own surprise, she began to cry. I don't know, she said, her voice choked. My mother's going to be angry that you stopped me and made me late. And you've completely ruined Uncle Henrik's lunch, so now he'll be mad at me too. The dogs whined and struggled against their leashes, nosing forward to the basket. One of the other soldiers muttered something in German. The soldier took out the packet. Why was this so carefully hidden? He snapped. Anne-Marie wiped her eyes on the sleeve of her sweater. It wasn't hidden any more than the napkin was. I don't know what it is. Then she realized was true. She had no idea what was in the packet. The soldier tore the paper open while below him, on the ground, the dogs strained and snarled, pulling against their leashes. Their muscles were visible beneath the sleek, short-haired flesh. He looked inside, then glared at Anne-Marie. Stop crying, you idiot girl, he said harshly. Your stupid mother has sent your uncle a handkerchief. In Germany, the women have better things to do. They don't stay at home hemming handkerchiefs for their men. He gestured with the folded white cloth and gave a short, caustic laugh. At least you didn't stitch flowers on it. He flung it to the ground, still half wrapped in the paper beside the apple. The dogs lunged, sniffed at it eagerly, then subsided, disappointed again. Go on, the soldier said. He dropped the cheese and the napkin back into her basket. Go on to your uncle and tell him the German dogs enjoyed his bread. All of the soldiers pushed past her. One of them laughed, and they spoke to each other in their own language. In a moment they had disappeared down the path in the direction from which Anne-Marie had just come. Quickly, she picked up the apple and the opened packet with the white handkerchief inside. She put them into the basket and ran around the bend toward the harbor, where the morning sky was now bright with early sun, and some of the boat engines were starting their strident din. The Ingeborg was still there, by the dock, and Uncle Henrik was there, his light hair wind-blown and bright as he knelt by the nets. Anne-Marie called to him, and he came to the side, his face worried when he recognized her on the dock. She handed the basket across. Mama sent your lunch, she said, her voice quavering. But soldiers stopped me and they took your bread. She didn't dare tell him more. Henrik glanced quickly into the basket. She could see the look of relief on his face and knew that it was because he saw that the packet was there, even though it was torn open. Thank you, he said, and the relief was evident in his voice. Anne-Marie looked quickly around the familiar small boat. She could see down the passageway into the empty cabin. There was no sign of the Rosens or the others. Uncle Henrik followed her eyes and her puzzled look. All is well, he said softly. Don't worry. Everything is all right. I wasn't sure, he said. But now, he eyed the basket in his hands, because of you, Anne-Marie, everything is all right. You run home now and tell your mama not to worry. I will see you this evening. He grinned at her suddenly. They took my bread, eh? He said. I hope they choke on it. Chapter 16. I will tell you just a little. Poor Blossom, Uncle Henrik said, laughing after dinner that evening. It was bad enough that your mother was going to milk her after all these years of city life, but Anne-Marie, to do it for the very first time? I'm surprised Blossom didn't kick you. Mama laughed, too. She sat in a comfortable chair that Uncle Henrik had moved from the living room and placed in a corner of the kitchen. Her leg, in a clean white cast to the knee, was on a footstool. Anne-Marie didn't mind their laughing. It had been funny. When she had arrived back at the farmhouse, she had run along the road to avoid the soldiers who might still be in the woods. Now, carrying nothing, she was in no danger. Mama and Kirsty were gone. There was a note, hastily written from Mama, that the doctor was taking her in his car to the local hospital, that they would be back soon. But the noise from Blossom, forgotten, unmilked, uncomfortable, in the barn, had sent Anne-Marie warily out with the milking bucket. She had done her best, trying to ignore Blossom's irritated snorts and tossing head, remembering how Uncle Henrik's hands had worked with the firm, rhythmic pulling motion. and she had milked. I could have done it, Kirsty announced. You only have to pull and it squirts out. I could do it easily. Anne-Marie rolled her eyes. I'd like to see you try, she thought. Is Ellen coming back? Kirsty asked, forgetting the cow after a moment. She said she'd make a dress for my doll. Ooh, excuse me. Anne-Marie and I will help you make a dress, Mama told her. Ellen had to go with her parents. Wasn't that a nice surprise that the Rosens came last night to get her? She should have waked me up to say goodbye, Kirsty grumbled, spooning some imaginary food into the painted mouth of the doll she had propped in a chair beside her. Anne-Marie, Uncle Henrik said, getting up from the table and pushing back his chair. If you come with me now to the barn, I'll give you a milking lesson. Wash your hands first. Me too, said Kirsty. Not you too, Mama said. Not this time. I need your help here, since I can't walk very well. You have to be my nurse. Kirsty hesitated, deciding whether to argue. Then she said, I'm going to be a nurse when I grow up, not a cow milker, so I have to stay here and take care of Mama. Followed as usual by the kitten, Anne-Marie walked with Uncle Henrik to the barn through a fine misty rain that had begun to fall. It seemed to her that Blossom shook her head happily when she saw Henrik and knew that she would be in good hands again. She sat on the stacked hay and watched while he milked, but her mind was not on the milking. Uncle Henrik, she asked, where are the Rosens and the others? I thought you were taking them to Sweden in your boat, but they weren't there. They were there, he told her, leaning forward against the cow's broadside. You shouldn't know this. You remember that I told you it's safer not to know. But, he went on, with his hands moved with their sure and practiced motion, I will tell you just a little because you were so very brave. Brave? Anne-Marie asked, surprised. No, I wasn't. I was very frightened. You risked your life. But I didn't even think about it. I was only thinking of... He interrupted her, smiling. That's all that brave means, not thinking about the dangers. Just thinking about what you must do. Of course you were frightened. I was too, today. But you kept your mind on what you had to do. So did I. Now let me tell you about the Rosens. Many of the fishermen have built hidden places in their boats. I have too, down underneath. I only have to lift the boards in the right place, and there is room to hide a few people. Peter and the others in the resistance who work with him bring them to me and to other fishermen as well. There are people who hide them and help them along the way to Gilead. Anne-Marie was startled. Peter is in the resistance? Of course, I should have known. He brings Mama and Papa the secret newspaper, De Frier Dansk. And he always seems to be on the move. I should have figured it out myself. He is a very, very brave young man, Uncle Henrik said. They all are. Anne-Marie frowned, remembering the empty boat that morning. Were the Rosens and the others there, then, underneath, when I brought the basket? Uncle Henrik nodded. I heard nothing, Anne-Marie said. Of course not. They had to be absolutely quiet for many hours. The baby was drugged so that it wouldn't wake and cry. Could they hear me when I talked to you? Yes. Your friend Ellen told me later that they heard you. And they heard the soldiers who came to search the boat. Anne-Marie's eyes widened. Soldiers came? She asked. I thought they went the other way after they stopped me. There are many soldiers in Gilead, and all along the coast. They are searching all the boats now. They know that the Jews are escaping, but they are not sure how, and they rarely find them. The hiding places are carefully concealed, and often we pile dead fish on the deck as well. They hate getting their shiny boots dirty. He turned his head toward her and grinned. Anne-Marie remembered the shiny boots confronting her on the dark path. Uncle Henrik, she said, I'm sure you are right that I shouldn't know everything, but please, would you tell me about that handkerchief? I knew it was important, the packet, and that's why I ran through the woods to take it to you. But I thought maybe it was a map. How could a handkerchief be important? He set the filled pail aside and began to wash the cow's udder with a damp cloth. Very few people know about this, Anne-Marie, he said with a serious look, but the soldiers are so angry about the escaping Jews and the fact that they can't find them that they have started using trained dogs. They had dogs, the ones who stopped me on the path. Uncle Henrik nodded. The dogs are trained to sniff about and find where people are hidden. It happened just yesterday on 2 boats. Those damn dogs, they will go right through the dead fish to the human scent. We were all very, very worried. We thought it meant the end of the escape to Sweden by boat. It was Peter who took the problem to scientists and doctors. Some very fine minds have worked day and night trying to find a solution, and they have created a special drug. I don't know what it is, but it was in the handkerchief. It attracts the dogs, but when they sniff at it, it ruins their sense of smell. Imagine that. Anne Marie remembered how the dogs had lunged at the handkerchief, smelled it, and then turned away. Now, thanks to Peter, we will each have such a handkerchief, each boat captain. When the soldiers board our boats, we will simply pull the handkerchiefs out of our pockets. The Germans will probably think we all have bad colds. The dogs will sniff about, sniff the handkerchiefs we are holding, and then roam the boat and find nothing. They will smell nothing. Did they bring dogs to your boat this morning? Yes, not 20 minutes after you had gone. I was about to pull away from the dock when the soldiers appeared and ordered me to halt. They came aboard, searched, and found nothing. By then, of course, I had the handkerchief. If I had not, well, his voice trailed off, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. If she had not found the packet where Mr. Rosen had dropped it, if she had not run through the woods, if the soldiers had taken the basket, if she had not reached the boat in time. All of the ifs whirled in Anne Marie's head. Are they safe in Sweden now? She asked. You're sure? Uncle Henrik stood and patted the cow's head. I saw them ashore. There were people waiting to take them to shelter. They are quite safe now. But what if the Nazis invade Sweden? Will the Rosens have to run again? That won't happen. For reasons of their own, the Nazis want Sweden to remain free. It is very complicated. Anne Marie's thoughts turned to her friends, hiding under the deck of the Ingeborg. It must have been awful for them. So many hours hiding there, she murmured. Was it dark in the hiding place? Dark and cold and very cramped. And Mrs. Rosen was seasick, even though we were not on the water very long. It's a short distance, as you know. But they are courageous people, and none of that mattered when they stepped ashore. The air was fresh and cool in Sweden. The wind was blowing. The baby was beginning to wake up as I said goodbye to them. I wonder if I will ever see Ellen again, Anne Marie said sadly. You will, little one. You saved her life after all. Some day you will find her again. Some day the war will end, Uncle Henrik said. All wars do. Now then, he added, stretching. That was quite a milking lesson, was it not? Uncle Henrik, Anne Marie shrieked, and then began to laugh. Look, she pointed. The god of thunder has fallen into the milk pail. Chapter 17. All this long time. The war would end. Uncle Henrik had said that, and it was true. The war ended almost 2 long years later. Anne Marie was 12. Church bells rang out all over Copenhagen early that May evening. The Danish flag was raised everywhere. People stood in the streets and wept as they sang the national anthem of Denmark. Anne Marie stood on the balcony of the apartment with her parents and sister and watched. Up and down the street and across on the other side, she could see flags and banners in almost every window. She knew that many of those apartments were empty. For nearly 2 years now, neighbors had tended to the plants and dusted the furniture and polished the candlesticks for the Jews who had fled. Her mother had done so for the Rosens. It is what friends do, Mama had said. Now neighbors had entered each unoccupied waiting apartment, opened a window, and hung a symbol of freedom there. This evening, Mrs. Johansson's face was wet with tears. Kirsty, waving a small flag, sang. Her blue eyes were bright. Even Kirsty was growing up. No longer was she a light-hearted chatterbox of a child. Now she was taller, more serious, and very thin. She looked like the pictures of Lise at 7 in the old album. Peter Nielsen was dead. It was a painful fact to recall on this day when there was so much joy in Denmark. But Anne Marie forced herself to think of her red-headed almost brother and how devastating the day was when they received the news that Peter had been captured and executed by the Germans in the public square of Rivingen in Copenhagen. He had written a letter to them from prison the night before he was shot. It had said simply that he loved them and he was not afraid, and that he was proud to have done what he could for his country and for the sake of all the free people. For the sake of all free people. He had asked in the letter to be buried beside Lise. But even that was not to be for Peter. The Nazis refused to return the bodies of the young men they shot at the town square. They simply buried them there where they were killed and marked the graves only with numbers. Later, Anne Marie had gone to the place where her parents and they had laid flowers there on the bleak numbered ground. That night, Anne Marie's parents told her the truth about Lisa's death at the beginning of the war. She was part of the resistance too, Papa had explained, part of a group that fought for our country in whatever ways they could. We didn't know, Mama added. She didn't tell us. Peter told us after she died. Oh, Papa, Anne Marie cried. Mama, they didn't shoot Lise, did they? The way they did Peter in the public square with people watching? She wanted to know it all, but wasn't certain that she could bear the knowledge. Papa shook his head. She was with Peter and others in a cellar where they held secret meetings to make plans. Somehow, the Nazis found out and they raided the place that evening. They all ran different ways trying to escape. Some of them were shot, Mama told her sadly. Peter was shot in the arm. Do you remember that Peter's arm was bandaged and in a sling at Lisa's funeral? He wore a coat over it so no one would notice, and a hat to hide his red hair. The Nazis were looking for him. Anne Marie didn't remember. She hadn't noticed. The whole day had been a blur of grief. But what about Lise? She asked. If she wasn't shot, what happened? From the military car, they saw her running and simply ran her down. So it was true what you said that she was hit by a car. It was true, Papa told her. They were all so young, Mama said, shaking her head. She blinked, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a long, deep breath. So very, very young, with so much hope. Now, remembering Lise, Anne Marie looked from the balcony down into the street. She saw that below, amid the music, singing, and the sound of the church bells, people were dancing. It brought back another memory, the memory of Lise so long ago, wearing the yellow dress, dancing with Peter on the night that they had announced their engagement. She turned and went to her bedroom, where the blue trunk still stood in the corner as it had all these years. Opening it, Anne Marie saw that the yellow dress had begun to fade. It was discolored at the edges where it had lain so long in folds. Carefully, she spread open the skirt of the dress and found the place where Ellen's necklace lay hidden in the pocket. The little Star of David still gleamed gold. Papa, she said, returning to the balcony where her father was standing with the others, watching the rejoicing crowd. She opened her hand and showed him the necklace. Can you fix this? I have kept it all this long time. It was Ellen's. Her father took it from her and examined the broken clasp. Yes, he said, I can fix it. When the Rosens come home, you can give it back to Ellen. Until then, Anne Marie told him, I will wear it myself. The end. I hope you enjoyed listening to Number the Stars. I know I'm not the greatest out loud reader for long parts. I had some trouble, but, we all have trouble reading sometimes, so just got to keep at it. Yeah. Enjoy. Good night. Goodbye.